Hi there, welcome to episode 68 of the Analyst Brief podcast brought to you by the Cyberhut. My name is Simon Moffatt, I'm founder and analyst at the Cyberhut, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. Dave, how are we doing?
I'm fantastic. Yourself, Simon?
I'm doing very well, Yeah, cannot complain. It feels like it's nearly February, so it's, to me, it's nearly spring. It's obviously, it's not at all, is it? It's cold. Where I am, at least, it is very cold. It is grey. It is definitely the depths of winter, but hope springs eternal. And I went to the gym first thing this morning at about 6:30, and it was dark. I'm not going to say it wasn't dark. It was dark, but the really cool thing was I was sat in the kitchen and I heard two owls. Well, I don't live in the real countryside, but I live on the edge of the village. Anyway, I heard two owls. One was screeching like a barn owl, and one was twitwing. So there was like this amazing, natural thing occurring. So that was the sort of, is that spring, or is it still the depth of winter? Because I can't actually see them because it was too dark to see them. Yeah, that was a nice little, a nice start to the day anyway.
I think it's a good signal. I mean, I think sometimes in the depth of winter when it's dark and it's cold and you don't really hear animals, especially birds. And I think there's something, I think, just that's so ingrained in us as humans that, like, when we start to hear birds, it is that like early signal with spring. I mean, there's obviously Groundhog Day when, they pull the groundhog out and whatnot, right? But, I think it is certainly one of those things. But, as we come in, and speaking of spring, I think definitely starting to look at calendars for events that are coming up.
Yeah.
Right. RSA is just around the corner. I know that's in March this year, but that's coming up really fast, right? So I know for yourself, Simon, I'm sure you're booking out, and myself, and so I'm sure for our listeners too, for those that are attending. I think, Simon, I know you're going to be there, right?
I am there. I'm getting booked out rapidly. Actually, RSA is obviously a big part of the calendar. Obviously it's a security conference, but equally, I've done it numerous years as you have as well. It is changing as security changes, as the world changes, and obviously each year, primarily have an identity lens on there. But there are more identity vendors either attending, sponsoring, partnering in and around the event. So it's always fascinating to see that stuff. And absolutely, getting booked out now for briefings, as you'd expect. Doing 2 or 3 exciting podcast things there, not actually analyst brief things. So there's a few announcements to be made there, a few analyst things going on, which is good. But yes, there's a bit of availability there. So get in touch if you do want to meet up. But there's that coming up. I'm going to be also heading over to Identiverse in June, which is a few months away yet, and also the IAM Tech Day down in Sao Paulo, down in Brazil. So that's the biggest identity event in Brazil, which is a great thing to be doing. It's a really Alfredo Santos and the guys are building out a massive community of practitioners both in Brazil and in Portugal. So that's a huge thing there. So I'm heading over there in April time. So it's the conference season, which is good. But I guess there's also a lot of stuff happening. We've talked last few episodes really about market changes and mergers, acquisitions and fundings and all this sort of stuff. And we touched on, CrowdStrike more latterly. They obviously dived in with Signal. And then literally a few days after we recorded our podcast, it sort of missed the cut for our last episode. But I guess in a similar vein, albeit not too similar, but Delinea announced that they were to acquire a company called StrongDM. And same but different. It's not exactly the same, and I won't necessarily put them all in the same sort of competitive arena. But for those who are watching in black and white or colour, I just brought up a research note on this, which we'll share in the links afterwards. But Delinea, for those who don't know, Delinea have been around for a while, and they were actually was actually Thycotic back in the day, a privileged access management vendor, PAM. And again, Thycotic been lots of sort of acquisitions, integrations with other vendors over the years, Centrify being one. And a new brand essentially emerged about 5 years ago called Delinea. And they, if you look at their sort of backstory, if you like, and it's a backstory they sort of admit themselves, that they they were a privileged access management company, which is, we discussed this in the past. Is it part of identity? Is it the same? Is it a peer? Is it a cousin? Historically, it's been this thing on the edge, really. It's been, different to IGA, different to IDPs and single sign-ons, and often had a separate budget. It targeted like a subset of applications. The budget was maybe somewhere different, and the CyberArks, Delinea's, Beyond Trust in there as well. And you're talking about session monitoring sort of stuff, password checkout things, because this was obviously before MFA and that sort of thing. Secure shell SSH access and gaining access to Linux servers, back in the day when servers existed and this sort of thing. So PAM has got a big history, but the world is entirely different. We're not really looking after servers anymore per se. It's cloud-centric infrastructure. We have non-human identities. We've got all this other stuff to deal with. So Delinea have evolved, and they've snapped up a company called StrongDM. And Delinea, again, not as big as CrowdStrike, but 1,200 employees, give or take, according to LinkedIn. So at least 1,000 employees there. And StrongDM, according to LinkedIn, have about 180. So obviously a huge difference there in size and revenue sort of comparisons there. But Delinea themselves, even as part of their press release, they say, look, that they made PAM, but today's enterprises need more than PAM. And I guess we're talking about more identities, more identity types, more privileged systems, hybrid sort of locations where it could be private cloud, it could be SaaS. And they've just, again, been on this journey, not dissimilar to CrowdStrike and others. I guess you could probably put sort of CyberArk in there as well, and SailPoint and Savient. They just keep adding on little acquisitions. And they did a couple the last sort of 2 years. They bought an ITDR provider called Authorize, and then after that they bought a smaller IGA provider called FastPath. So they've been just adding in different, very complementary technology there. So anyway, over to you before we sort of unpick this a little bit. I mean, I know Delinea aren't directly competitive, but I think it's just yet another big company buying a smaller company. Standard sort of pattern, StrongDM been around for a number of years, built a good, solid customer base, good references, good feature set. It seems like yet another complementary move there. Any immediate thoughts on what you think on this one?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I would just tell our listeners to check out the article that, is up on the Cyber Hut. Really good overview of the StrongDM acquisition. So number one, just to I'll take a few steps back just to put things, at least in my view, of the context of what's going on, right? Identity is the control plane, right? It's become this area. It doesn't matter if it's a human, it's a partner, it's a machine, it's a non-human, all of that. The market has recognized that you have to have identity as a big piece of your control plane, right? So we've got the moves from Palo Alto, we've got the moves from CrowdStrike, Signal, and even Seraphic. So, Seraphic was browser extension stuff. So they want to own kind of the endpoint, I don't think CrowdStrike wants to own the identity per se, but at least have a very strong ability to understand what's happening around the identity. So that fuels further intelligence and context, so that with Falcon, they can make better real-time decisions of, is this a threat? Is this not a threat? So on and so forth. So you have that going on that side. Then when we look in when we double click on the identity market, and that's what we're talking about here with Delinea. And yeah, they've rebranded, they've merged, they've picked up pieces along the way. And I think with this bringing in StrongDM, I think there's a tiny bit of overlap, but I think there's a lot of synergy here that's quite possible. And if you look at, the article, Simon from the Cyber Hut here, again, AI is mentioned, right? That the fact that, agents and non-human or machine actors, that is a part of this puzzle as well. But I think my takeaway from this, Simon, and why I wanted to just call out what we're seeing with the cyber platforms, let's say, they're like, hey, we need to at least have our hands in identity. On the identity side, what I think we're seeing with all the major players, including Delinea, is better, let me just phrase it this way and I'll unpack it, better resolution of that identity control plane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So rather than just thinking about credentialing and giving someone access to something, we've been talking about just in time. We've been talking about things like ITDR. So the notion is if I'm going to give Simon and or Simon's agent access to a particular resource, and I want to take a just-in-time approach, having all that other telemetry, having not the ability to enforce and the intelligence now allows us to really take a zero trust approach and say, yeah, I can allow Simon to access this, but I'm going to give it to him in a least privileges manner so that if something bad happens, it's not going to completely encrypt the entire database, right? Because he may only have access to a certain part of it if I can enforce that. So to me, what this shows, to sum it up, is, again, it's better resolution of what's going on in that identity layer, and to make better decisions in real time. And I actually just had a call fairly recently with Nathan Harris over at Gartner. So shout out to him, where what was interesting is he's published some research fairly recently, along with some other peers over there at Gartner. But what was interesting is he was talking about identity and credentials. Mm-hmm. Identity is forever, and authentication is something that you do often. And there's credentials where it's like those credentials can be revoked and renewed, but we have to distinguish between identity and credentials. And so taking that kind of notion, that I think applies here, because I think he said something that was interesting. He's like, if you asked most organizations, they would understand how many service accounts they have, but where they lose visibility is how many services are those service accounts connected to.
Yeah.
And by understanding identity and credentials, right? That's really, because it's like, you set the identity for, say, an agent, and we know that agent can do certain things. And then of that, if you have the visibility and the ability to enforce, you can say, yeah, it's hooked up to these 5 services, but I have the ability of these other 2 services within the 5 to do just in time. And maybe I don't default to just giving anyone, the agent, access right under the gates. So anyway, I'll pause there, but to summarize, I think this just brings better resolution to certainly PAM, but also gives better control to Delinea, if they obviously, connect this up and execute on bringing these worlds together. It just kind of gives them a more holistic view of really where it's going with workloads, ephemeral identities, or credentials and what have you.
100%. I think it makes really, really good points there. I think there's absolutely spot on around, not dissimilar to CrowdStrike, really, in the sense of they now have just extra ways of interfering with the adversarial attacks, right? If we think about both CrowdStrike and Delinea or PAM, it's definitely more on the security side than sort of productivity, albeit there were clear productivity gains here. But by that, I mean, it is more, you have more touch points to respond, to remediate, to recover from bad stuff happening. And I think you're absolutely spot on around, if PAM isn't just these silos on-prem anymore, it's absolutely, there are on-prem things there, yes, but there's private cloud, there's PaaS, there's infrastructure to think about, PaaS-based infrastructure. There's all of, I guess, SaaS management plane as well. I think that's an area which is often overlooked. So you sign up for a SaaS system. There's still sort of onboarding and provisioning, administration, connection, administration really to be done. You don't want to be doing that stuff. That has to be protected as well. It's another extension of your privileged control plane, essentially. So,
actually, I'm just going to throw in one thing quick there, because you just triggered a thought. ServiceNow with Vesa.
Yeah.
ITSM, to your point, like managing your IT resources.
Let's come back to that. Let's come back to that as well. So I've got. So you absolutely. But the point I wanted to amplify was, you talk about response, and that's exactly. If you looked at the CrowdStrike press release, it was saying, look, now we have Signal, and we can now enforce. We're going to use Signal as our enforcement thing. And if you look at the press release from Delinea, they talk about further down. Delinea, we're going to expand, we're going to do more PAM stuff. But then it says, look, Delinea, a pioneer of these solutions, we're going to secure humans. Okay, great. Machine identities. Yeah, okay, great. But when you then use StrongDM as a universal access management company, that's quite it's a nice generic term. There's a lot of ambiguity there, but
Yeah.
Access management, we know, auth and auth and some other just-in-time stuff. Universal, that's quite nice. It's a broad term. It's going to say, look, we're going to do services, agentic, AI, whatever, because everybody has to. But I'll also mention engineering, DevOps. It's just extending the privileged concepts to more systems. So they need to have access management. And then it goes through there and talks about just-in-time authorizations. Again, not dissimilar to Signal, both looking at things in a slightly different angle. But we're talking about just-in-time. We're talking about being dynamic. We're talking about removing standing permissions, standing credentials, all of that heavy baggage, if you like, which is known to undermine a lot of these systems. And then it's talking about developer first, so another different stakeholder, not just administrators, but also developers. And we're going to form a new class of identity security platform, being continuous and always on. Very similar sorts of words to both the external authorization players and the privileged access management players and the NHI players. And so we're just seeing this emergence of more ways of detecting, yes, brilliant, and discovering, but just back to your point, responding and doing something about it. If you find something of malicious interest, should we say, you have more tools in your kit bag, more ways, more weapons to respond, albeit I'm not keen on that sort of analogy, but it just gives you more in your arsenal to respond. And, we're seeing lots of other vendors like P0, like Teleport, they're all very, very able and similar in being able to look, we can protect cloud systems, on-prem, infrastructure systems, applications which are being developed in-house. That whole privileged world, if you like, now is much, much broader than it was even probably sort of 8 years ago, I guess. So I think Delinea are clearly in a strong position, the size they are, but they need to adapt as well. They need to evolve, and they need to spread their their tentacles to protect all things. It seems to be a good move in that respect.
Do you think, Simon, that this move from Delinea had any influence from, say, CyberArk being acquired by Palo Alto? Because if you look at kind of the space they play in, Beyond Trust, Delinea, right, CyberArk, what do you think there?
It'll be very, very unusual if it wasn't influenced. But I mean, look, these sorts of deals and partnerships, they don't just happen overnight. There's often maybe a 6 or 12 month relationship first around a normal sort of go-to-market partnership, and you see how things work and you see how things don't work. So, StrongDM, Delinea, that's obviously been there for a while. So I don't think any of these things happen overnight. However, things rarely happen in isolation. So it's probably accelerated things. Let's assume that it's probably accelerated. Okay, we need to do something. We're looking to change and grow and adapt. I think the CyberArk thing, CyberArk's being consumed, it's going into something bigger and different. So that really might alter their own go-to-market. They may end up being more concentrated on their existing customers and Palo Alto's existing customers than worrying about trying to get net new logos for a while, because they're going to be quite preoccupied there, which, that may leave an opportunity for the existing PAM vendors to try and expand perhaps. But then the long story short there is, of course, at the end of that integration, which however that may take 6-12 months, who knows, CyberArk and Palo Alto, it's even bigger. It's an even bigger machine with more prospects and clients and others. So I think all of these things are interrelated. I think, does it really change outcomes? Maybe not, but I think it changes the speed of the outcomes. I think it may, maybe have accelerated things potentially. But I think the PAM space is fascinating. I think there's some really interesting stuff. We did the research notes on probably about 6-8 weeks ago, looking at the mean time to access. And by this, we're talking about, we know standard employees gaining access to systems is a pain. So we improve our access requests and sort of access review processes. But if you then take that into things like the DevOps, application engineering, all of those CI/CD pipeline worlds, access gets in the way. Privileged access, credential issuance, credential minting, hard coding stuff. It's all of those bad practices get in the way of developer operations, security operations, all of these individual functions getting apps and services out the door. So you need to get PAM right, you need to get access right, And it sounds like now we need to do that just for more stuff. And I think we've got this agentic stuff to consider as well. And is that going to sit within PAM? Is it going to sit within the NHI? Is it going to sit within infrastructure? There's again a three-way vendor overlap there to try and protect that stuff. So good luck to them. Good luck to the guys there and the team there. It's they've got a StrongDM, got a really strong brand, good use cases. Built a decent sized company there. So I think they've said it'll close whatever this next couple of quarters. So we'll keep an eye on that one. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, congrats to the team. I think it was Tim over there. I know we've been taking a look at StrongDM for some time. So, I wasn't overly surprised, but just one of the things I was just thinking, Simon, as we're unpacking all of this, and even in light of other movements that have happened in the space, and multiple conversations that came out of Gartner IM just before the holidays. If you go back, I always go back in history and look at, where we started, right? And look at that evolution. And it feels like we're going through the beginnings of IAM again in a different way. What do I mean by that? Well, if you fast forward multiple decades ago and think about how, when an employee joined an organization, every application had its own identity store. So you had like a username and password, let's say, for every app that you might need in your job. And of course, if you need access to a new app, you have to get, the application owner, and they'd give you new credentials, and maybe you just use the same ones, right? Just to make your life easier. But obviously a nightmare for orphaned accounts, a nightmare to when you're audited and knowing who has access to what and all that. So obviously the world moved to like LDAP, AD, right? Then virtual directories to at least have some centralized views. So I, create the identity here, Simon's identity, and he's in DevOps. So he has access to all these applications. You change roles, you're a mover, obviously, right? We know all this. But when you think about that, and let's keep it on humans, right? And let's forget about cloud for a moment and workloads and all these things. Let's just still stay on-prem, right? We are bringing more resolution to it in such that we can't. So before it was very static. I just give you access to it. I limit it by way of like just roles in your OU, and like that's it. But they're static, right? Until someone does a review process and changes things. Moving to something that's more dynamic and taking the concepts of ITDR and zero trust, you can now move to more like real-time type stuff. And I would argue that while we saw like OART get acquired and Spira get acquired by Okta, I'd argue that still, even though on paper and in theory, the visions of those haven't fully been realized on the human side yet, right? And the case in point is like we still have identity related breaches, right, on humans. So there's that going on. And I think now we're trying to bring in all these universal identities. I like that. Your agents and your non-humans and your machines, right? All these workloads, all these different types of things. And again, to me, if we just ignore that excitement and all this stuff ballooning up and go back to those core principles of where IAM started and what we need to add in terms of the contextual inputs, the real-time decision-making, the just-in-time decision-making, all of this, I think, to me, starts to pull in together. Identity as a control plane. And I still think that I'm gonna say it's gonna be very difficult to have one platform to do all of it really well. I can see, there'll be players that are gonna be very strong with human identity and others that will be very strong with non-human or machine identity. And then I think there's gonna be something in the middle for folks that maybe are small, medium business, are not heavily regulated, and they can get the best of both worlds where I can get great human functionality, great privilege functionality, great customer functionality, and great agent non-human functionality. But I think it's inevitable that large orgs might have to backfill with other providers. I think we're in for multiple years of that, that identity evolution continuing. I don't think it's going to be over this year when we see all these acquisitions. I think that's going to take some time. But in my view, I think that's where we're going. We're going back to those beginning principles of centralizing identity. Because when I think of developers coming into the mix, right, that's what triggered my thought process here, is that developers need that too. And they need a way so it's not slowing them down, but they can still build their apps, run them, first kind of in a sandbox, and then get them into production safely. And all of those identities that are needed there, I think going back to what I said, to those early day principles of identity, we need to remind ourselves of that and where identity started, and start mapping these new worlds and new use cases and new users to that, and fill in those blanks. Because look, and last thing I'll say is, it's one thing when the vendors get together and they have their visions and everything else, but let's just look at reality here. The vendors are moving really fast, and they're moving way faster than practitioners are. Practitioners have hard-line budgets and people and resources and regulations. They just can't all of a sudden turn around tomorrow and implement all this stuff. They need a very, very easy on-ramp to get them that way. And I do think that leveraging some of these other bases are there. And my last point, I'll just say, was like, I talked to a number of folks just on the Palo Alto point, and it seemed like, these are just practitioners, various industries, various sizes, right? They were just saying, they're just getting their Palo Alto reps saying, hey, you should look at CyberArk, you should look at our Venafi offering under us now. So it's seeming like they're just like, pushing it a little bit that way, as in terms of getting a larger share of wallet. And when I asked it was a couple practitioners, okay, so it's not statistically significant. But a lot of them were just saying, they didn't get in in-depth conversations about it. So it sounded like it was like a generalist at Palo Alto that was talking to them about identity topics. So again, it's not something where they'll go back and say, this is where identity started and this is what you need to do and this is your on-ramp to it. It's more of like, hey, we can bundle this in. Anyways.
I think there's some really interesting stuff. I think there's so many Venn overlaps here happening, and I think you've got to take identity out just for a second and say, what is identity really there to do? And as always, and it sometimes gets blurred a little bit, but if there's no business, identity doesn't exist. So it has to enable the receiving function. Now, so we talk about just in time, talk about being dynamic, we talk about being adaptive, all of these sort of technical buzz terms, functional requirements, if you're back in my product management days. And they're all great, and they're all things they should be things we should be aiming to do, whether it's for fraud in the B2C space, whether it's for PAM, whether it's for agentic. These are all sort of things, verbs we need to be working towards. But if we zoom out a little bit and say, well, why do we need to do this? Why does identity need to be agile and dynamic and responsive and adaptive, all these sorts of things? And you say, oh, well, it never used to be. Yeah, I get that. So it's an incremental innovation. We need to make the horse faster and all this sort of stuff. But you need to sort of say, well, okay, why does the business want that? And the business wants that because ultimately, if identity is in lockstep with what the business is doing, it's delivering applications and services and data and products that the business wants to do, and the business can sell more, the business is successful. If identity can do that, everyone's a winner. So why does the business want to be agile and adaptive and responsive? And ultimately, it's about the business facing massive amounts of uncertainty. So whether you are in financial services, whether you are in manufacturing, public services, public sector, you face uncertainty. You find uncertainty around customers, revenue, your competition, geopolitics, compliance. There's a lot of uncertainty going around the world at the minute. So businesses face massive amounts of information asymmetry. If that sounds like a really boring topic, it's one of my favorite topics of all time since I was at university 30 years ago. If anybody's interested, dial me up. Information asymmetry problems are the best problems because they're really difficult to fix, and they exist in nature as well as humans. So what we're talking about here, well, businesses have to compete, but they don't have full information. So they're operating in a really opaque landscape, and they need to get applications to market faster, and they need to, let's use agile development to get our mobile apps out there because we're not quite sure whether the customer's going to like it, and maybe we have 1 million people downloading a mobile app and we need to iterate on it. We need to add in new features and make one-click sign-up faster. And so it's all about agility and speed and getting things to market faster. Because there's an information asymmetry problem. Because if you knew exactly what you were going to build, how long it would take, how much money it would generate, and how much it would cost you, you wouldn't need to go fast. You could go at a nice pace. Anyway, so the business faces uncertainty. So that uncertainty has to be then translated into your technology world. So we see cloud, we see SaaS, because it's quick. We see microservices, we see new and more extreme ways of developing systems. We now use Codex, or we use AI to generate things, but it's all about speed and failing fast, and being a product manager, you get stuff out the door quick, and it's not finished, but it's in front of a design partner, so you get feedback, and you're trying to get feedback to close your information asymmetry problem. What am I talking about? Well, all of that stuff really, it all filters down into your identity world. And if your identity layer is modern and really, really plugged into how the business is doing stuff, whether it's a challenger bank, whether it's a retailer, whether it's making electric cars, if your identity layer is really plugged into how the business is doing business, all of those things become really, really vitally important. And they act as that flywheel to allow the business to do stuff. And it closes the information gap. It allows them to deliver products and services faster and everything else. So, absolutely spot on. We are going to see things being adaptive. We are going to see things being more agile and responsive and just in time, because that's what the business needs. And the business has to solve some really fundamental problems. But just to sort of finish off on your point there around the concepts, I think if you look at identity more abstractly and say, look, we need authentication, we need authorization, we need permissions management, we need all these sort of fundamental building blocks. You don't assign identity types to them. You don't assign particular sort of, is it a B2C, or is it employees, or is it agentic? Because you end up with these really siloed ways of thinking, really siloed ways of buying technology. But if we start to talk about those concepts and say, right, well, for my agents, I need an authoritative source, I need strong authentication, I need just in time, I need permissions, blah, blah, done. For my staff, I need authoritative source, just in time permissions, strong authentication. So you start to have these concepts, and you throw them at all of your identity types, right the way down to the identity of your hardware, your firmware, the infrastructure, all the way down. And suddenly you have this sort of identity matrix, heat map, risk map, call it what you want, but it's end to end. And absolutely, you're not going to go and buy one vendor that does all of that end to end. But you have the concepts in place, and you can start saying, well, okay, for my staff, end to end life cycle for identity, I've got IDV, I've got identity assurance levels, authentication assurance levels, blah blah blah. Do the same for your NHI, same for privilege, same for infrastructure, same for data, same for devices if you have them, physical devices and stuff like this. So you have this end-to-end identity world. Absolutely, that isn't going to be a single platform. There may be some overlaps. The big Venn, we described, NHI, PAM, and agentic, whatever. There's going to be overlap for sure, but just make sure you're thinking end-to-end and then top to bottom, and just applying those concepts that we know and love, authent, assurance, all that sort of stuff, making sure it's there for all of your identity types. I think we're nowhere near that, but I think if we are, as an industry, we can start to see these wheels turning and say, oh, we've got the infrastructure world, like Teleport and others, they're sort of handling that, and then we've got PAM, and then we've got end-to-end permissioning, and then we've got NHS. So you start to have the same identity functions, at least, reappearing at all of these layers, and then you start to get market consolidation and a bit of overlap, and you have just better information flows, or at least better integrations than we ever had. And things like stuff being static, that sort of disappears. It ends up dies on the vine, perhaps, or even the buy side, the practitioners, they sort of do that leapfrog architecture thing and say, we'll keep it static for a while, and then we'll just leap and jump to this amazing world of the modern.
No, these are all fantastic points. Of course, Simon. I mean, I think that's the major challenge. I think a lot of the buy side, the practitioners are obviously faced with is their actual constrained budgets, their constrained teams, their resources, and trying to balance delivering on the needs of the business versus like what they can actually do today. And a big chunk of IAM today at most of these, larger orgs is technical debt that they have to manage, deal with, while they're getting pushed to do, like, just for example, I mean, I ran a little workshop with Aaron Sutton from Office of Google Cloud CISO. It was a closed session at Gartner, and it's very clear that everybody has some kind of mandate to do AI, some maybe more aggressive than others, but everyone has to do something. And I agree with that, but I think the major challenge is people are like, I have all this technical debt, I have all these outstanding problems that's been kicking that can down the road for so long, and yet I'm told I have to do something over here with AI and AI agents. So I think that the challenge is that there are some things where you can try to cross, pollinate, where you can say, if I do these couple things that might be quite boring on my identity infrastructure, but it puts us in a position where I could maybe pull budget and or mind share and or political view of AI internally into this program. That would be one, like, that was a key insight I got. Like, if there's a way that you can have an AI angle to dealing with your technical debt of IAM in particular, that for some organizations I know is working well for them in, like, okay, we can get more resources to do this. But I think just, and again, this is a generic kind of view because there's too many specific conversations I've had on this. It's look, this is a moment where there's a lot of exciting things happening with AI, and there's a lot of really amazing things we can do with it. However, it's not a panacea, and I think we are seeing, like Microsoft. I mean, I think it's kind of looking like they may have leaned in a little too hard on Copilot, and I certainly am not seeing it perform as well as ChatGPT or Gemini. I'm just not. Right. And I know a lot of developers that are like, no, I don't even use it. I use Anthropic, or I'll use like Claude, or I'll use Gemini. Right. So we have to be careful about those investments. But I think the smart IAM leader today is going to look at, how can I draw some of that excitement, energy, use that to modernize some of this stuff. It's boring, I know, but this is the stuff that's going to create that foundational level, so that you can then, say, hey, we can take on these agents, and we've got a good approach. Maybe we're leveraging Delinea, maybe we're using some of our CrowdStrike functionality, the signal. I don't know, but we're able to see, orchestrate, and actually, at least deliver on some of these very attainable and digestible AI, things that we're trying to achieve this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think some of the debt. I think the debt thing is a problem, and I think that's. I think, ironically, I think some organisations, they may go bankrupt, and by that I mean metaphorically bankrupt, and say, look, we're just going to let those things. They're too big for us to deal with, and we are just going to let some of those big things just 2, 3, 5 years, whatever, and hopefully they'll just disconnected applications or systems or something, and just say, look, we're just going to wrap it in lead and just wait till it becomes obsolete or just disappears, because the cost of doing something with it is just too much. And I think you're right around, there's a lot happening. And if you are, say you were a Microsoft, a CrowdStrike, and a whatever, I don't know, say an Okta customer, whatever, you sort of got those big strategic technology investments, and you say, well, let's see what they have. What do CrowdStrike keep providing? Maybe we get some stuff for free or a trial, or we just incrementally keep seeing what these incumbent providers give to us. The risk of that, of course, is they all end up competing. So they end up looking very similar, and it's like, oh, what do we do? I've got some cloud-based PAM. How does that work? Or whatever, Delinea bought StrongDM, but I've got that from over here, and I can't compare it. I can't contrast it. I don't know where it works. And I think you may see some organizations, especially the big guys, a little bit imbalanced. They may have 4 or 5 different PAM or IGA solutions or onboarding solutions or whatever, but I don't have any, as you say, AI governance or whatever. So you end up with these sort of overlapping capabilities. And it's interesting. You mentioned CrowdStrike. Let me quickly just add this in.
Maybe just as you're pulling it up really, really quick. I mean, that honestly, I think even for you and me, Simon, we're in this market. We've followed it. We've been following it. We've talked to people across the board, invest practitioners and sellers. It's really I'll just say this, right? The vendors really have to get their narrative right.
Yeah.
And when I mean right, not just focus on you and selling stuff. Look, I get it. At the end of the day, you have a fiduciary responsibility in your job, right? You're paid to have your company grow. Totally get it. We're all in that, right? All of us are in sales. I don't care what anyone says. If you're a practitioner and you work at a bank, you're selling your bank. Okay, like you're there to make sure the bank can have customers. Don't, like anyone who thinks that they're not attached to money. I mean, come on, right? Even in government services, you're serving constituents who pay taxes towards you. That's a whole other thing. But my point is that the narrative to what you were saying, it's getting very confusing. Like if you were to walk the show floor of Identiverse or Gartner IAM or Black Hat or whatever, and you're looking at those identity vendors, one, the narrative's all sounding the same. We secure AI. Okay, what does that even mean, right? We have agentic, identity lifecycle controls. Okay, what does that mean, right? Like again, I think having folks like yourself, Simon, right, who are kind of agnostic and looking at the space and saying, yeah, I know you have invested in CyberArk over here. You also acquired another company that has Delinea, right? Let's look at what your use cases are in your target systems. It might turn out that like you can keep CyberArk over here working on these few things because maybe you don't want to touch it and don't want to break it because it's some legacy stuff. Maybe you got Delinea over here. Maybe I don't know. I'm just saying it, right? Like maybe now with StrongDM, that's maybe the horse you can use in your environment because of your use cases in your sector. For another client, it might be the complete inverse. It might be, oh, you've got CyberArk and some Delinea. Maybe CyberArk's the way to go. The vendors need to do a better job themselves of not, saying our competitors suck. No, saying this is what we're really good at, and that's what we do. And you have all these other legacy things. We have made these acquisitions, and these are the things that they actually specifically do. Give people a roadmap, an on-ramp on what your tech stack looks like and what it actually means. I'm not seeing anyone do that right now. It's a really good, obviously, opportunity for your guide points and your GSIs that are out there, obviously, to do that consulting, and your RSMs, right? But I think the vendors themselves they're all sounding way too similar, and their messages are not differentiated, right? They're just not.
Yeah. I think it's difficult, and I get a lot of this in inquiries saying, look, how do you define? You say AI is a good one at the minute. It's like what parts? How do we secure it? What does it mean? You got the LLM bit, you got the MCP. It's confusing for the buy side because they don't necessarily want more stuff. Maybe they may invest in augmentation if that augmentation layer can squeeze more value out of a SailPoint, a Microsoft, an Okta, whoever it is, where you've got an incumbent infrastructure set of components, and they do some stuff, but they need to be optimized. You need to improve them. More applications onboarded, clean those applications up, blah, 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 blah. So they're happy to buy an extra tool to help the other tools, but they don't want any more software per se. Yeah. So they need to see exactly where things are.
I know you're jumping into this, but I'm just going to say one of my favorite quotes from the movie Office Space.
I've not seen, no.
Right? Where those consultants were saying, so what would you say you do here? Right? Like, we just need to, like, that's, I think a lot, when you talk to
it's quite brave, though. It's brave to qualify out, though, isn't it? If you define what you do, it also means equally to define what you don't do. I think it is there is definitely a lot of ambiguity.
You can take it either way, right? But as long as the person's like, my business objective is X, and what you do doesn't help me achieve X, or what you do does. Great, let's talk.
I'll tell you what the difference is, though. I think there's the real subtlety here about what you do and what the outcome is. So if you look at let's just pick on Delinea, that press release they just had there. Yeah. I won't bring it up again, but the press release talked about universal access management. Okay, it sounds great, but it's very ambiguous, and it's intentionally ambiguous, so it can cover more things. But it's ambiguity around the solution. It's not ambiguity about what that really helps the business to achieve. So if it says, we can find and delete orphan accounts, it's a really simple. It's a feature really, but it's an outcome led thing. It's a KPI. It's a metric which you can assign an outcome to. I think there's that ambiguity around. We have this amazing technical a Dreamcore widget machine and it does everything. It's like, okay, but what does it spit out at the end? And it's the spitting out at the end, I think, which is really, really important, because then if you're a buy side, you can tie that into, okay, your big machine does everything. What's going to come off the conveyor belt? Do you know what? Sausages. I don't want sausages. I'm actually looking for meatballs or whatever. So it's really, that can tie in with, as long as you understand what your own business requirements are, and that's often. Anyway, let's wrap up this episode. I want to CrowdStrike's been topical for the last couple of weeks. I just want to pull up more activity. Not an acquisition, I hasten to add, but they announced, I think today or yesterday, a partnership with a company called Natoma. It's just another, I guess, rolling thunder of announcements for them. So this is on their website, on Natoma's website as well. So Natoma Agent for CrowdStrike Falcon. This is all about agent discovery. I think that there's a big issue around agents at the minute, around where they are, what they're doing, how are they interacting with MCP? Do you have rogue MCP servers anywhere? All of that sort of stuff. So the Natoma Agent Access integrates with CrowdStrike Falcon to automatically discover and manage AI agents on the endpoint. So again, CrowdStrike obviously got the endpoint coverage and all of the sort of device stuff there downstream. And this looks like it's going to automate automated AI discovery. Sounds good. Centralized management, so it provides a unified control over distributed agents. So again, back to that unification thing. You want a central place to cover lots of different things you want to manage. Visibility and observability over your MCP, Model Context Protocol usage. Again, a lot of that's shadow, a lot of it's unmanaged, a lot of it's there's no control there. Risk reduction, unauthorized AI integration. So again, I think it's a problem for now. I think hopefully over time, a lot of these problems will disappear and AI becomes much more managed within organizations. But I think at the minute, it is a bit of a Wild West, and there's lots of different both SaaS and sort of in-house integrations and deployments. There's no control, nobody knows, there's no consistency, no design standardization about using Auth 2, 2.1, blah, blah. It's all just, so I think it's a really good tactical thing. And again, it's just shown CrowdStrike constantly in that marketplace, constantly partnering with startups. So whatever, it's not huge headline news, but I think it's interesting just on the back of what we've been talking about this week and the last couple of weeks. And CrowdStrike is continually adding in more things there. So I think we'll probably see similar things happening.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's pun intended. It's a signal. Another signal just in the industry that, like, I think my read on this is and by the way, just on the note of talking about objectives and what would you say you do, it's very clean and just shows a reader like, okay, Natoma, I don't even need to know much about them at this point in time, but I'm a CrowdStrike customer and I can see that, oh, this is interesting. Now there's potential for me. This is maybe a concern as I'm going down my AI strategy about these rogue servers and rogue agents. And like, this allows me to at least kind of discover them, bring some kind of management to them, bring some compliance to them, and maybe ultimately some risk reduction. So I think this looks like a good, dipping of a toe in the ocean for both parties, Natoma and CrowdStrike themselves, which, who knows what this could lead to, if it leads to something bigger, if it leads to mimicry, is that the word? Of other vendors copying them, right? So maybe your Sentinel ones, your Palos, others, looking at what they can do here as well. So, and part of it, I think, might also be reactive to at least some of the messaging that I've read through coming from Palo specifically, kind of in this arena. It's I think this is an interesting one. I think it's really good for Natoma in the sense that, they're a smaller player in, I guess they've always played the NHI arena or machine identity arena. But I think this is good for them because it ecosystem is the way to go. And for CrowdStrike, I like this as well because it's saying, hey, like, we recognize, to our point before with, hey, we have all of these vendors, we have all of this tech that's out there, but in our ecosystem, if you are to look at someone like Natoma, it clicks right into Falcon, which has a good ecosystem. So I think that's another big thing too. The ecosystem play for any and all, especially these smaller vendors, they just don't have this center of gravity that your Palos have and your CrowdStrikes have and your Microsofts have and your Googles have. They've got such big gravity wells that if you can play into those, I think that's good. So my view on this, it's very early and it's just a kind of a, marketing at this point. Really interesting. And I think, again, it's another good thing, another good signal in the industry. And the other note, I think, is like, I'm not seeing identity here, like, unless I missed it in the page itself. It seems like it's just focused on access. And it's not really a critique or anything. It's just more of an observation that identity is not a high level term here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Only things I would add, I think, I guess two things. One, I always get suspicious of these things. So my immediate suspicion would be, I guess CrowdStrike can't do this today with my immediate one. So if you're going to partner and make an announcement, it indicates that you can't do this already, which is quite interesting because CrowdStrike have talked a lot about agent management over the last 12 months. So that's an interesting, it's a very buy-side signal. If I was in the buy-side, do you not do this already? So that's number one. Yeah. Number two, 100% agree with the sort of ecosystem thing. And it's, it takes a village to do all this stuff. If you are small or smaller, you need to partner and get out there in that technical ecosystem. And back to what we're saying there around end to end, no one vendor can do everything. I think that's clearly the case. And simple integrations, end to end, extension, I think that is hugely important. So again, it is early. I think time will tell how that works out. And I think there'll be other, as you say, maybe copycat or mimicry, I think it is the term there. But I think it's good. It's another more visibility for Natoma. They're going to get potentially access to a bigger sales force, and they'll put in there, but a sales engine, if you like, of CrowdStrike. So it's a good one. Yeah, there's no identity there, which is was that a good thing, bad thing? I don't know. Maybe it's just not a thing. I don't think it needs to be mentioned. I think it's just part of it. But good luck to them. So Dave, let's park it there. There's a whole host of other topics we were going to bring up here, but as always, we've done a good deep dive on the topics we've gone through. I think there's, as always, I think we said at the end of last year, this year is going to be definitely a year of movers and shakers and partnerships, acquisitions, and all that rest of it. And it's always good. We talked about the conference season. It's always good at the conference season. You get a bit of a flavour as to which vendors are sort of working a little bit too closely together or hanging around each other's booths a bit too. You sort of get that intel a little bit. So it'll be interesting. Maybe there'll be some announcements at RSA and Identiverse and Garden.
Exactly. I think we'll be continuing our dialogue, of course, as always. But it's going to be interesting to see in the next month, and certainly within March during RSA, what will be announced there.
Indeed.
Who knows? Maybe there'll be some more M&A, capital raises. Definitely. It's all exciting stuff in our industry. So definitely excited to see that.
All right, Dave, thank you as ever for sharing your words of wisdom. This has been episode 68. Do get in touch. We have had some questions and stuff starting to come through now, so we're going to try and sort of augment those into our podcast as part of a question time thing over the coming weeks and months. So if you do have any specific burning topics, there's been a few posted to me on LinkedIn today, which I need to uncover a little bit more about. But if you do have any questions or topics or areas or likes, please send them through, and we can sort of try and do the Ask Me Anything sort of gambit, maybe not live, but we could certainly do a few staged questions. If you get those into us, that would be amazing. But thank you, wherever you are in the world, listening in and adding your comments on social media as and when you do them. That is fantastic. Dave, thank you forever for your insights and words of wisdom. This has been episode 68 of the Analyst Brief podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.